Hi, Todd Martin here with The Walking Code. In this video, I'm going to describe how to use the core techniques of the walking code and the quantum movement system to analyze the sprinting technique of Usain Bolt. At the end of this video, I'm also going to personally demonstrate how to use the core techniques to run approximately like Usain Bolt. Click the like button, subscribe to the channel if you're not already a subscriber, and if you're already a subscriber, please click that join button so you can become part of the Walking Code community where you can get really more personal interaction. And I want to give a shout out to my first member, James, who is a movie director and has a newly released movie that you can see on Amazon called Cyberlante. I watched the movie, it was really great, so give James some support and watch his movie Cyberlante. Now let's get into the sprinting technique of Usain Bolt and how we can use the core techniques from the quantum movement system and the walking code to analyze what he is doing. If you're not already familiar with the core techniques, they are the 8 energies which are derived from Tai Chi theory, and they're the 8 energies that we use in the core to produce all of our functional body movement. And I've analyzed it in the walking code, which you've already seen if you've watched any of the walking technique videos. But you can also use those core techniques to analyze other things like sprinting and running or any other sort of activities that we do while we're standing up on 2 legs. The nice thing about the core techniques is that they explain exactly what's going on in here, which is largely invisible when we're moving. When we're moving, we often look at the legs and we look at the arms and we try to describe what's happening, but we don't really see what's happening in the core because we can't really see rotation of the trunk as it's going on. With the core techniques, we can actually specifically describe exactly what's happening with the core that's producing what we see as whole body movement. So now let's look at the core techniques used when we're sprinting. And this is how Usain Bolt is able to get so fast, and that is using the proper core mechanics in conjunction with his incredible strength. And coordinating the strength and the mechanics is how you're going to get optimal speed. Let's begin with the first core technique is going to be push. Now the push is the part of the movement that occurs after the leg is swung out in front of the body, and then we're going to push down with the swing leg and push it into the ground. The push down is going to be the same motion that we have on a bicycle. It's also the same motion that we have when we're walking downstairs. You'll notice when I push down going downstairs, my ankle is going to plantar flex as my right arm starts to come forward. Right arm comes forward, ankle plantar flexes, my left knee is going to flex, and I'm going to be pushing down to the ground. The power is coming from extension of the hip. So I'm extending my right hip, pushing it down. I'm actually going to use my lower abs to turn back, which aids in the pushing down of the hip. So I'm going to turn my lower abs, rotating my pelvis backwards on the right. At the same time, I'm pushing down or extending my right hip. And at the same time, I'm going to turn my upper abs, which you can see as the rotation of the thoracic spine. I'm going to turn that to the left as my hip is extending and my lower abs are turning to the right. So hip extension, lower abs turning to the right, upper abs turning to the left. And that's where you get this pushing action here. The second core technique in the sprint, which we also see in jogging and with running, is going to be pulse. The issue with this core technique is it is completely invisible, because pulse is the same as push with one exception. I'm extending my hip. The active hip is the right hip here. I'm turning my lower torso to the right or backwards. In push, I'm turning my upper torso to the left. In pulse, I'm going to turn my upper torso to the right, and that is what's going to generate extension of my right knee and further plantar flexion of my right ankle, and that is what's going to impulse the body off the ground and into the air. You cannot see the muscle moving because it's largely invisible, but when you see Usain Bolt doing this, what you'll see is his chest puff out as soon as the leg hits the ground. That is the motion from when he goes here to turning the upper torso. This is what happens. I have push, pulse, push, pulse. As I pulse, I'm still extending my right hip. I'm still turning my lower torso backwards. I'm going to change the direction of rotation of my upper torso, and you're going to get additional extension of the knee and plantar flexion of the ankle, and you will see the chest thrust forward. That's push, that's pulse. Now obviously I'm going to have no momentum going because I'm in a stationary position, so that's not going to bounce me off of the ground. But when you're in movement and I'm using that action with an impulse downwards against the ground, and then I turn the push into pulse, that is always what gets us off the ground when we're running. Push to pulse is what allows us to take off. And in sprinting, why we have such a short contact with the ground is because that push and pulse begins in the air. Push, pulse, and you take off with very little ground contact. When we're running or jogging, what happens is we actually land with extension of my left hip. This is I'm running, and running with a mid-foot strike. When I'm running, I'm actually extending my left hip at the time of landing. So if I'm running, as I land on my right leg, my left hip is an extension. Now I'm going to push and pulse. So I do not begin to lift off the ground until after the landing has happened. And so this is going to require a full foot placement on the ground before the push and pulse will take me off. When I'm sprinting, or when Usain Bolt is sprinting, that push has already begun in the air, and it hits and pulses right off the ground. And you'll see that the heel, when he does it properly, does not even come down to the ground. You've got that plantar flexion when the foot hits, and it continues to plantar flex, impulsing or pulsing him off the ground, and so there is a very brief ground contact. When we're jogging, you'll even have a longer ground contact, because as I'm jogging, I'm actually flexing my left hip as I land on the heel, and then I continue to bring it forward with a longer ground contact, rolling forward. Then I push and pulse. Now let's look at the third core technique used in sprinting. In sprinting, the third core technique is going to be lift. Lift is a hip flexion movement. I'm going to flex my left hip. So this is flexion of the left hip, and I'm going to use torsional rotation on the side of the left hip, which means when my left hip is flexing, I'm going to turn my upper torso to the right and my lower torso to the left. This is the same technique we use if we were going to do a kick with the heel. So if I'm going to kick out with the heel, that is lift. The peripheral actions, or the peripheral joint actions in lift, are going to be extension of the knee on the side of that flexing hip and dorsiflexion of the ankle on the side of the flexing hip. This is the third core technique, and it's the one that is used before the push. If I switch sides, so now I had just landed with my left leg and pulsed off the ground. My right leg is in the air after the pulse with the left. Now I'm going to use lift of my right hip, flexing my right hip, torsional rotation on the right. And so the lift comes here, and the lift goes right into the push and pulse. And then once I've pulsed into the air, I would then do a lift from my left hip. I think in my demonstration you can see all three of the essential core techniques, including the push down, the pulse up, the lift forward from the forward leg, and I do believe I do a fairly good job of landing with my leg underneath the body weight towards the forefoot. Thanks for watching.